Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we'll follow the next chapter of Ibrahim Traoré, the man who tried to become a hero, but found himself trapped in a war with ghosts and expectations too heavy for any one person to carry. If you thought a revolution would be a clean break from the past, think again. Ibrahim Traoré's first year in power felt like standing on a knife's edge, day after day, night after night. When he closed his eyes, he still saw the faces of villagers who had begged him for protection, and he saw the faces of the fallen, whose names weighed on his heart like stones. He had tried to copy the purity of Thomas Sankara's revolution, to keep his uniform simple, to walk among the people, to refuse the polished halls of power. But no matter how much he tried to hold on to those ideals, reality always crashed against him like a hammer. There were still terrorist raids in the north, the same burned-out markets, the same mothers digging shallow graves for their children. And every time Traoré thought he'd pushed the enemy back, they shifted, striking somewhere else. It was like fighting smoke with a sword. He grew harsher because he believed harshness was the only way to survive. He expanded local militias, let them arm themselves with almost no oversight. He gave military units sweeping orders, crush the terrorists, whatever it takes. And he meant it. But the cost was high. Innocent men accused of collaborating were shot without trial. Young boys were forced to fight, whether they believed in the cause or not. The seeds of trauma took root, and even as some villages were saved, others grew resentful, suspicious, broken by new cycles of violence. The international community watched with horror. Human rights groups released reports listing abuses. The United Nations warned that Burkina Faso was teetering on the edge of even greater chaos. Foreign journalists labeled Traoré a dangerous strongman, no better than the tyrants before him. But for Traoré, these critics had never seen their homeland burn. They had never looked into the eyes of a mother whose children were stolen at gunpoint. They had never seen a village where every man had been executed for refusing to join a jihadist group. He believed they had no right to judge him. His soldiers, however, were reaching their limit. Some deserted. Others died, broken by exhaustion. The militias, once a symbol of local strength, began abusing their own neighbors. And Traoré had to watch as the revolution he tried to build turned into something darker, something twisted beyond recognition. Each morning, he forced himself to stand before the mirror and repeat, "I will not fail." But the mirror started answering back with doubts. He still gave speeches in the spirit of Sankara, promising dignity, promising freedom from colonial masters, promising a future where Burkina could hold their heads high. But the crowds that once roared with pride now looked tired, suspicious, sometimes afraid. In the presidential compound, the atmosphere grew colder. Traoré's inner circle shrank. Paranoia took hold. Who could he trust? Rumors of conspiracies spread every day. Assassins, traitors, mercenaries. Some nights he hardly slept, his pistol by his bedside, because if he had betrayed Damiba, who was to say no one would betray him? Every phone call from foreign allies brought new pressure. Hold elections, respect democracy, make peace with the jihadists. But every time Traoré thought of sitting down to negotiate with men who had butchered children, his blood boiled. He would rather die than give them a place at the table. So he doubled down, ordered more offensives, poured what little money Burkina Faso had into drones, training, and weapons. Even as the treasury ran dry, even as hunger grew in the cities, he refused to step back. He was the son of a teacher. He was the boy who once dreamed of rocks and minerals, who dreamed of making the land blossom. Now he dreamed only of victory, or at least, of not surrendering. But the war inside him was worse than any fight on the battlefield, because deep down, he could feel that he was changing, that the hero he tried to be was fading, replaced by something harder, colder, more ruthless. And even though he hated it, he could not stop. Maybe that was what leadership truly meant, letting go of the part of yourself that still believed in happy endings. In one moment of clarity, after a long night meeting with his commanders, Traoré stepped out onto the palace balcony. Below, the city was quiet, the streetlights blinking like tiny stars. Somewhere out there, people were still hoping he would save them. And he whispered to the darkness, "Please, do not let me become the monster." He knew the darkness had no mercy. The next day he would put his uniform on again, stand before the cameras again, swear to fight again. But the tragic hero is not defined by the enemy outside. He is defined by the war inside. Traoré's second year in power began with the same question echoing in his mind. How far will I go before I lose myself completely? The answer was never simple. Every day brought a fresh wound to his country. Another burned village, another mass grave, another group of children too afraid to sleep. The weight of their terror pressed on him, pushing him further toward choices he would have once called unthinkable. His advisors pleaded for caution. They warned him that empowering militias without limits was creating a monster he couldn't control. Reports flowed in of summary executions, forced marriages, even villagers selling their own neighbors to militias just to settle personal grudges. But Traoré could not look away from the front lines. To him, those were the only places where the fight truly mattered. And if civilians suffered under militias, that was, in his mind, the price of war. An unbearable price, but one he felt powerless to refuse. In his speeches, he still invoked Sankara, calling on the spirit of a revolution that had died with a bullet decades ago. We must stand together. We must never kneel. Yet those words rang hollow in some ears because the pain on the ground kept growing. International condemnation increased. Aid was threatened. Human rights observers left the country, calling it too dangerous, too lawless. Even regional leaders began to distance themselves, worried they would be seen as backing another warlord. Through it all, Traoré refused to show weakness. He fired generals who questioned him. He replaced regional commanders with younger men who owed everything to him. He put his trust in loyalty, not competence. And that loyalty grew brittle under the pressure of constant bloodshed. Inside the palace, the walls seemed to close in. Traoré barely spoke to his family anymore. His friends from university were gone, scattered or afraid to reach out. Every night, he paced alone, haunted by the faces of children he'd promised to protect, and failed. He thought of his father's words from long ago, under that neem tree. If you want to change the world, you must change yourself first. But what if changing himself had destroyed everything that made him human? In the countryside, rumors spread of a coming famine. Crops had failed in provinces where conflict raged too long, and traders refused to bring food to war-torn zones. The economy collapsed as foreign investors fled and supply chains fell apart. The dream of a second Sankara, a clean, honest, bold Burkina Faso, turned to ash in the mouths of hungry children. Traoré tried to keep hope alive by announcing new projects, irrigation plans, youth job programs, anti-corruption drives. But his ministers could barely implement them. The war devoured every dollar, every ounce of focus, every dream. His soldiers, once fearless, now hesitated. Their morale broke, seeing how quickly the enemy adapted, how impossible it was to protect every village, every road, every school. Some deserted entirely. Some turned their weapons on their own people to steal food. Traoré saw this and it tore at him. But he could not stop. Because stopping meant admitting defeat, admitting that his revolution had failed. And if that happened, what would he be? Nothing but another name on a long list of strongmen who rose and fell, devoured by the same demons. So he pressed on, held tighter, doubled down. One night after a particularly bloody battle in the north, he visited a field hospital filled with wounded children, their tiny bodies torn by mines and bullets. Their eyes followed him with a silent question. Why did this happen to us? He had no answer. As he stepped out into the night, one of his oldest commanders approached him quietly and asked, "Sir, do you ever wonder if we are becoming the very evil we are fighting?" Traoré looked at him, exhausted beyond measure, and said, "Every day." But the next morning, he was back in uniform, giving orders, preparing another assault, because the only thing he feared more than becoming the villain was surrendering. In this land of broken promises, Ibrahim Traoré had become a tragic hero, a man who tried to save his people, but was being devoured by the endless hunger of war. And far away in the dusty corners of a classroom, another child might already be memorizing his name, dreaming of a better tomorrow, not knowing that heroes too can be torn apart by the very dreams that create them.